Hello, everyone. My name is Alaina G. Levine, and I'm president of Quantum Success Solutions and author of the book Networking for Nerds. And I'm really delighted to be here with you today and to be here with my strategic partner, the Materials Research Society, to talk to you about a topic that I'm very excited about. I'm always excited about, and that's landing your industry or government lab dream job. And again, I want to thank the MRS for their kind support of this type of initiative. You know, MRS is your strategic career planning resource and partner throughout the lifetime of your careers. And they have so many different resources available to assist you in you achieving success the way you want to define success. And I encourage you to take advantage and leverage your membership in MRS to help you move forward. We're going to be talking about how to apply for jobs, how to land jobs in industry and government labs. We have a whole team of people here with us today who are going to assist us with this effort. And I want to start by introducing my friend and colleague, Zach Hood, who's at Argonne National Lab. Hey, Zach, welcome.
Hey, thanks for the introduction, Alaina. My name is Zachary Hood, and I'm an Argonne scholar at Argonne National Lab. I'm a member of the MRS Early Career Professionals Subcommittee who's organizing an upcoming event that will be discussed on the next slide. We have our chair, Babak Anasori, here to provide some information about this new subcommittee of the MRS. Babak, please.
Thank you, Zach, and hi, everyone. Early Career Professionals Subcommittee of MRS started its activities in 2019 with the mission of creating a more engaging environment for early careers within the MRS community and benefit from all the resources. Our goal is to provide guidance and support to younger professionals in all aspects of career development. That includes job application for both academia and industry, best practices for doing research, creating new collaborations, effective presentations or paper writing, grant writing for both as a company or as a research lab and other things. We usually do these by organizing symposia, panel discussions, webinars like this webinar, poster sessions, and other activities. In case you're wondering where to find our subcommittee activities, you can check the MRS website. Or even easier than that, at least to me, is to follow MRS LinkedIn page or connect with us, the subcommittee members. For example, on this webinar, we have Zach Hood, Stephen Spurgeon, and myself. We're all members of Early Career Professional Subcommittee, and we're all active on LinkedIn. And you can, we usually post these activities on our LinkedIn pages. And the last thing I want to add is our subcommittee is always looking for new proactive members who can contribute in the activities that we have right now, or even bringing new ideas to the table. If you're interested in joining our subcommittee, send me an email and express your interest. And with that, Zach, I give it back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Babak, for the excellent introduction to the subcommittee. Next, I'm going to introduce our next four panelists who will be part of the question and answer session at the end of this webinar. So our first panelist is Eugene Bay, who's a member of research staff at Palo Alto Research Center. Our next panelist is Christopher Capuano, who's a manager in research and development at Nel Hydrogen. Our third panelist is Lucy Nolan, who's a TD Module and Integration Yield Engineering Manager, Logic Technology Development at Intel. And last, our fourth panelist will be Stephen Spurgeon, who's a staff scientist at Pacific Northwest National Lab.
Thank you so much, Zach. And Babak, I want to give you a virtual high five for talking about the subcommittee and also encouraging other MRS members to join. And I want to say to the audience, joining a subcommittee and a committee of your professional association of MRS is one of the best gifts that you can give not only to your community, not only to your colleagues, but honestly to yourself in terms of career advancement, because you really get a sense of how to work on this committee. You get a sense of how the community operates. You get exposure to leaders in the community, stars like Babak and Zach and other team members. You get a chance to learn new skills such as communications and team building and conflict resolution. And you also have the opportunity to be in a very high visible scenario to help your association chart its course towards helping other members. It is really a wonderful opportunity to help you land your dream job, not only for the information that you're going to get, but for the information you're going to give and for the contributions that you're going to make. So Babak, high five, dude. And Zach, high five to you as well, as always.
Thank you.
Zach, I have a question for you. Can you tell us about this new enterprise that MRS is starting, has begun to offer, the Meet Your New Industry and Government Lab Candidate Poster Session?
Yeah, of course. So the MRS Early Career Professional Subcommittee is organizing a new poster session called the Meet Your New Industry and Government Candidates Poster Session, which will be offered at upcoming MRS meetings. This event offers a great opportunity for recruiters and talent scouts from industry and government labs to meet new candidates. This event is open to early careers within the MRS and offers an excellent opportunity to market yourself to recruiters and also get feedback during the poster session. To find out more information, check out the MRS website and submit your abstract to this new event. Now I'd like to give the spotlight back to Alaina, who will tell us all about the goals of today's webinar.
Thanks, Zach. And just for the audience to keep in mind, this is a really exciting initiative that will be featured at upcoming MRS meetings. I hope you will leverage it and take advantage of it. So today, what we're going to be talking about in this webinar is how to build an effective marketing package for industry, not just academic, but for industry and government lab jobs. You really have to make sure that you are communicating your value in the most effective and efficient manner using their language for them to understand, for them, meaning these organizations, for them to understand why they should hire you, why they should invest resources in bringing you into the team. And also, we're going to be discussing how you could get ready for the MRS Meet Your Industry and Government Lab candidate events that you'll be able to take part of in the future. And of course, we will give you that opportunity to hear more from the subcommittee leaders and panelists. I'm very excited to hear their thoughts about career development and job searching in this marketplace. So whenever we start a marketing plan, and I hope you're not freaking out, don't freak out on me, MRS, amazing goddesses and gods. You don't have to worry if I'm using the word marketing. What we're talking about is appropriate self-promotion, totally appropriate ways of communicating your value. That's what we're talking about when we talk about marketing. So if we're going to market ourselves for these types of jobs, for these roles in these types of organizations, before we market anything, we need to know what the value is. What is the specific unique value that you have that would be of interest to the employer? Then you have to know what the potential employer values and then use their language, their verbiage to communicate how you are uniquely qualified to deliver this value to the organization, and more specifically, the alignment between your value and values of the employer and what they value as well. The value, when I use the word value, what I'm talking about it's a suite of all of your skills, experience, expertise, knowledge base, and even your networks that you have access to. All of that is part of the package of who you are as a professional. And it's part of who you are that I'm investing in when I bring you into my team. So your ongoing questions as you're engaging in this space and looking to land that amazing dream job and build your unicorn career is, number one, what is the unique value that I can provide with my knowledge and experience and expertise? This relates to problem solving. So I'm also asking myself, what are the unique problems that I can solve, that I specifically can solve or understand or even identify? Identification of problems is in itself a very important piece of value that you have because of your unique perspective, because of your unique background, because of your unique expertise in everything. And this goes for every single person. You have the ability to identify problems and see problems that I myself might not be able to see. There may be a wall that's impeding innovation within our organization, but I might not be able to see it because I don't have the perspective. I don't have the experience that you have in looking for those walls, looking for those pain points. That is absolutely invaluable to organizations because organizations, especially government labs and industry, they want to to stop impediments to innovation. They want to contribute to the growth and the advancement of their organization to continue serving their customers. The only way they can do that is to constantly innovate. So if they bring in a team member like yourself who can help them identify new walls that are impediments to innovation, you are greatly of value to them. So that's a very interesting aspect of your value. So you're also asking, what are the ecosystems where I can add this value? And another way of phrasing looking for those walls is, where are the pain points in systems that I could potentially alleviate? Or where are the gaps in systems, in projects, in teams, in organizations, even in fields that I could potentially fill with my expertise and experience? Now, I wanted to really spend much of this webinar telling you how awesome you are. Material science and engineering goddesses and gods, you are amazing, and you have so many opportunities in terms of career development ahead of you. The reason is because material science and engineering in particular comes with a suite of skills. Not only do you know material science and engineering, the technical side of it, but you also have gained a lot of business skills and soft skills and project management skills and even communication skills that are all very relevant and are coveted by many, many different types of sectors. So I wanted to just give you a taste of what types of industries want you, which industries desire you, the material science and engineering goddesses and gods. So this list that you see, and I'll read you some of these from this list, comes from a series of articles that I have contributed to in a magazine called APS News. It's published by the American Physical Society, and the column is called Profiles in Versatility, and you can find that online. And what it is it's a look at people who have physics degrees, undergrad, grad, whatever, and what types of careers they've gone into. And it specifically focuses on physicists in surprising, unexpected, or even unusual career paths and sectors and industries. So the list that you see in front of you is a list of people, a list of organizations and types of industries and sectors that I have discovered physicists working in. And of course, material scientists and engineers, you have such a strong physics base. So there's absolutely an analog between this list of industries and the list of industries that you could potentially pierce. So where could you go? What industries, what sectors desire you? Certainly big data, depending on the amount of computing knowledge that you have. But then there's also the entertainment industry, interestingly enough, and not just on the side of being like a science consultant to a TV or a movie, a TV show or a movie, but also actually working on the coding and that sort of thing. Oil and gas industry, the automotive industry, aerospace, banking, green energy, risk assessment, consumer products, food, forensics, all of these different fields, all of these different sectors, they know that you as a material scientist and engineer provide great value in advancing their mission. And so they are extremely excited to have you on their team. So what do you do, quote unquote, in industry, right? There's a couple of different paths that I just want to highlight for you. So one is the scenario which you, I'm sure, have heard of, research and development, or R&D. So this is where you're actually working on you could say raw research that will lead to a potential product or lead to a potential service for the company. It will lead to an actual engineering innovation. So it's scientific and engineering research that will lead to usually an engineering innovation that will lead to a product. But note that path. It's not just research for the pure curiosity of it, like you find in an academic lab, and also perhaps in a government lab, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. In industry, the customer is king and queen. And so everything the organization does in industry is in service of the customer, of supporting the customer, of gaining new customers, of selling the customers new products and solving problems for them in an innovative and novel way. So the R&D division is serving that purpose. There's also another type of scientific job that you can get in industry, and I call it scientific problem solving. So this is where somebody who has a material science or engineering background is deployed to a different division, maybe not R&D, but maybe they're in product maybe product testing or quality control, or maybe they're on the manufacturing side or even the logistics or supply chain side. They are using their scientific expertise and knowledge to solve problems in the system, but they themselves are not doing the research. They're not doing the research. But what I've also found very interestingly is industry is so rich with career options for scientific and engineering educated professionals that there's a limit, almost like a limitless direction or limitless directions where you could potentially go. So for example, if you wanted to go and work for an industrial organization, you could do this, but not necessarily doing science, not necessarily doing engineering, but using your science and engineering skills in other divisions to solve other types of problems, which could be very simply things that are business related. It's very interesting to me about how the operations, the logistics, the marketing and sales, communications and public relations, quality and government relations, policy and government relations, quality control, and even risk assessment, all of these different divisions really rely on people who have a science and engineering background, because you see problems differently than people who are traditionally educated in those fields. In other words, somebody who has a degree or an expertise, a really long-standing expertise in risk assessment, is going to be able to see risks, and they're going to be able to assess those risks and manage those risks. Of course, that's their job, that's their knowledge. But in comes somebody like yourself who's getting in this position. You're going to be looking at risk and looking at opportunities to manage risks and potential risks in a different way because of your unique perspective, and that is absolute value. In government, of course, we're talking about federal labs, which really does involve a lot more R&D. It is more curiosity driven, admittedly, in service of the nation. I'll talk more about that in a bit, as will our panelists. And there's also scientific problem solving in service to the client. The client typically is the nation, but sometimes, government labs also have partnerships and collaborations and even clientele who are in industry or in academic scenarios or in other types of ecosystems. Government labs do not necessarily just have to be federal labs. There are also national, regional, state, provincial opportunities. And then there's also other types of government positions that you could be pursuing, multinational like the EU or the UN, federal agencies that transcend even different countries, and of course, policy opportunities. So in all of these scenarios, whether you work for a government lab, a government agency, a university, an entrepreneurial venture, a startup, a mid-sized company, a large-scale company, a multinational company, a cupcake bakery, whatever you work for, the purpose of any job anywhere is to solve problems. So your job is to position yourself and market yourself as a problem solver in this universe so that people understand your value. Now, you know what the purpose of any job is, right? I hire you to solve problems. But what's the purpose of any business? And that goes for industry and, in a certain respect, even some government labs. The purpose of any business is to make money. And honestly, even nonprofits have to make money because they have to bring money in to fuel their operating costs and then to fuel the projects that they want to bring out to the community. But in general, what's very interesting is that every organization is essentially a business. Even a university is a business. There are customers, those are the students, and there's a product, that's the degree, and the customers, the students, are paying money, or some other entity is paying money, perhaps in the form of a grant or a loan, for the student, the customer, to get the product, the degree. So if you look at it that way, what you need to be aware of is that if you're going to go into industry in particular, you need to communicate your value. The value that you need to communicate is that you are going to be helping them solve problems, cut costs, increase sales, and beat the competition, because that's what businesses are trying to do. That's what industry is trying to do. Solve problems, cut costs, increase sales, beat the competition. If you can communicate that, it will allow you to land your dream job. And what I've found a lot of times with particularly early career material scientists and engineers in particular, is that when they go on the job market, when you go and are looking for jobs in industry and government labs, you often will not necessarily sell yourself, the full self of who you are, or communicate the full value of who you are, because you are undervaluing yourself. That's where understanding what it is that you can do for an organization is very, very important. But the second piece of the puzzle is understanding what that organization values. Remember, I told you earlier that you need to be able to clarify an alignment between your value and what the organization values. Well, here's what every business values at its core: cutting those costs, increasing sales, beating the competition, serving the customer. The customer is king and queen. So everything we do provides value in the form of these four areas: solving problems, cutting costs, increasing sales, beating the competition. Don't forget to talk about that when you're on your interviews, when you're writing your resume, when you're communicating your value. So the problems of industry are to create new products or services based on scientific discoveries and or engineering innovations, and to look for gaps in systems that we can fill with our innovation. STEM becomes a tool that leads to product creation that can be sold. So the science and engineering research that we do particularly in the company, has to lead to a product that can be sold for the most part. In other words, I wouldn't necessarily be working for a company, let's say like 3M, the materials company. I wouldn't be in their R&D center doing pure physics, particle physics research. Like, I'm not going to be studying quarks and gluons in 3M, because that's not necessarily going to lead to a product or a service that 3M can sell right now. But to be able to, for example, do research in 3M's R&D division in materials and how we can utilize more machine learning in characterization of unusual materials, that would be of interest to 3M's mission. That would allow 3M to potentially use that information to create products in the future, even if it's long-term in the future. That would be something that they could potentially support. So I just want you to be thinking about these things. So then we need to think about, if we want to move into government labs, what are the problems of government labs? This is truly more of a curiosity-driven ecosystem. It's still in service to the overarching goals of the lab, which are to serve the nation's technical and policy interests, which means that the research tends to be a little bit more applied, although it doesn't necessarily have to be. And many labs pursue research projects in concert with industry and academia and other types of organizations, as you know. I wanted to ask Zach, you work for Argonne National Labs. What are your thoughts about the problems of government labs and working for a government lab?
Yeah, thanks, Alaina, for that excellent question. So if you look at the research and development cycle of like different sectors, the role of government labs bridges both aspects of academia as well as some aspects of industry. For instance, within the United States Department of Energy, there are 17 national labs. And of these 17 Department of Energy national laboratories, 10 of these DOE labs are Office of Science, 4 are considered other labs, and 3 are National Nuclear Security Administration labs. The work of the national labs is incredibly diverse, ranging from basic sciences to applied sciences. National labs host many researchers from both academia as well as industry each year. And also many government labs work with companies through small business innovative research, small business technology transfer, and cooperative research and development agreements. Of course, each government lab has a mission, and the scientists and researchers serve that mission through their work.
Thank you, Zach. Yeah, it's interesting to note that, am I right in saying no two labs are the same?
Yeah, I would say that, each lab, has a different focus area and a specific level of expertise. The scientists at these labs, really, drive that expertise and really develop the brand for the national lab. So, whenever, the government sets up these labs or, refocuses some of the areas, they don't want, two labs necessarily to do the same exact thing. So, in order to best use tax dollars and, and justify, funding, there has to be great diversity within the national lab system.
That's a really great point. And I love how you put that. And so for the audience listening, as you are pursuing your dream job in a government lab, just make sure that you're clarifying for yourself what are the principles that are guiding each lab. You don't have to just say to yourself, overall, I want a job in a government lab. What you should be thinking is, what do I want to do in a government lab? And then finding the government labs that are doing the things that you want to be a part of. Very interesting. And just to remember, I love that element of diversity, because of course this is a larger ecosystem in and of itself, so there shouldn't be repetition of resources. So now I want to talk to you specifically about how awesome you are and how amazing you are and why you are goddesses and gods of this multiverse. And so there is great value that you have, as I mentioned, in and beyond academia that you can use to market yourself for these dream jobs. That's what I want you to be thinking about. So obviously, as a material science and engineering goddess and god, you are excellent problem solvers. It comes with the territory. You've been solving problems for many, many, many years, and it comes with being a material science and engineering educated professional. You are also adaptive, adaptable, and flexible. You can change in real time. You can respond to stimuli, to challenges in real time. That's a very important thing to be aware of and to make sure that you're communicating, particularly to industry and government labs. You have great critical thinking and analysis skills. You take a disciplined approach. You are truly self-motivated. You wouldn't have chosen to study the hardest subject known to humankind if you weren't self-motivated. And particularly for those of you who have gone on for advanced degrees, it's quite something. It shows me what kind of a professional, what kind of person, what kind of problem solver you are, just the fact that you pursued material science and engineering. And of course, depending on the nature of the work that you've done, you probably have excellent computing skills and can solve a problem from the ground up. You also don't accept things just the way they are. This is very interesting to me. Because you are both holistic and detail-oriented in your problem solving, you see things from the mountaintop view and from the granular view, sometimes even at the same time. That is absolutely invaluable in industry and government labs. You also understand how the physical world works. Don't underplay that. That's a really key aspect of who you are. It will help you in developing solutions, deploying solutions, developing products and services within the environments that you choose to work. And you also have most likely very good project management and teamwork experiences. After all, material science and engineering as a field in and of itself is a very diverse field, and it's a very international field. One of the great pleasures that I have as a science and engineering career consultant is working with people from all over the world. I'm working with material scientists and engineers from all four corners of the round world, or the flat earth, depending on your viewpoint. And my feeling is that the privilege of being able to interact with people from different nations and cultures has helped to inform me as a problem solver in helping my clients and in being better at all the types of problems that I'm trying to solve myself as a business person. And similarly, the exposure and the interaction and the networks that you have with people from all over the world, that is actually going to be an asset to you in getting your dream job and being successful in your dream job, because not every field affords that type of experience. You also will have access, and do have access, to huge networks along those same lines. And very interestingly, when I hire you, I'm not just hiring you for your brilliant brain, I'm hiring you for all the brilliant brains that you have access to. So that's something that we're going to be also communicating. And we also know that our work has everyday applications. Now, beyond science, beyond the engineering, there are hard business skills, which most likely you have gained from being in material science and engineering. Now, these skills you could have gained from doing projects in Mat Sci and engineering, or they could be from things that you did that were tangential to material science and engineering. For example, maybe you were part of your MRS chapter on your campus at the university, or maybe you were on a subcommittee, hopefully with Babak, or maybe with Zach or some of our other panelists. But the idea is, in any of these circumstances, you are gaining hard business skills. You are gaining leadership and team building and conflict resolution skills and communication skills. You are learning how to manage and navigate projects and people and money. You may be getting exposure to accounting and finance, particularly if you're on a grant or wrote a grant proposal. If you've mentored people in your research group or lab, if you've trained people, if you've hired people, you might have human resources and training experience. And inventory and procurement, maybe you had to design an inventory system for your lab, for your research group. If you have an advisor or a PI, you have risk management experience. And of course, if you've written a grant proposal or a paper or have given a talk or a poster at any time, in any scenario, you have sales and marketing experience. And my guess is you probably also have public relations and event management and customer relations, and of course the grant writing too. So what I mean to tell you these things, the reason I'm telling you these things, just not only to stroke your ego and to help you understand why you are so amazing and brilliant and invaluable, is because I want you to be able to sell the full value of who you are and what you could offer these organizations. And a mistake that many scientists and engineers make in writing their resume and in doing interviews and in networking even, is they only talk about their technical expertise, but they don't talk about the hard business skills that they've gained. And in particular, if you're going to go work for a business that is brightly a business, so that is clearly saying, showcasing, amplifying they're a business, which is an industrial organization, or go work outside of academia for a government lab, you need to make sure that you can clarify that you have these other skills. It is very valuable that you have them. Make sure your potential employers understand you have that value. All right, so now we know how awesome we are, so let's go get that unicorn career. Let's go get that dream job. So now that we know who we are and what the value is that we can provide the employers, now we have to organize our marketing materials. We need to collect the data, organize it in a way that the different ecosystem representatives will understand it, and will be able to take action on it and hopefully invite us in for an interview and hire us, and then develop them and keep them up to date. So with industry jobs and with government lab positions, a majority of the time you're going to be using either a CV or a resume, or what I like to use is a hybrid. It's a document that actually combines features of the resume and the CV. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the idea is that on a resume, you were talking about all the problems that you've solved and you're clarifying your skills. And on a CV, what a CV does is it actually creates an opportunity for the reader to understand an exhaustive list of all the different things that you have done in your life. So it lists all of your papers, all of your projects, all of your presentations, the workshops you've been to, the workshops you've given, all those things. But in industry, they don't need that full list necessarily, but they do need a summarization. They do need to know how many papers you've written and maybe a few examples of some of your star papers, or how many presentations you've given and maybe a few examples of some of the places you've spoken. So that's why I mention a hybrid. You're also going to develop cover letter templates, and I recommend that you do that now so that you have templates ready to go when you see jobs that are advertised that you'd like to apply for, or you've been networking with somebody and they invite you to apply for a position. You will also be gathering your references and your letters of recommendations right now. You'll be editing your LinkedIn profile and then any other profile that would be relevant for the type of role you're pursuing, which might be on ResearchGate, or it could be on another social media site. So on your hybrid document, we start with a headline and an executive summary. So the headline is not unemployed, but super cool material scientist looking for a job where I can apply my critical thinking skills. That's not the headline we want. The reason why we don't want that is because, first of all, what that does is the very top of a resume or a CV is the most valuable real estate, right? That's the first thing that people will be reading. And so we want to get to the point very, very quickly, use that real estate to our advantage by being very concise and sharing not what we want from the other party, because it's a marketing document, it's what can we do for the other party. So your headline can be something like material scientist or PhD material scientist with expertise in X and Y materials or X and Y techniques. You can actually state out a list even, and I like to do it by separating them out using slashes. I will actually write out a few of my areas of expertise, of my value that would be of interest to the employer who's going to be reading that. So for me, I'm a science writer, I'm a professional speaker, as you know, and it's totally clear. I'm a corporate comedian that's absolutely hysterically funny, and I do project management and event planning too. So on my resume, on my hybrid document, my headline would say, depending on what type of job I'm going for, professional speaker, corporate comedian, career consultant, science writer. If I was going for a job that was more focused on event management and project management, I would put event management and project management first. So that's an important thing to be aware of, that you want to be able to customize all of your documents and be ready to customize them for the different positions. And then the executive summary can be in paragraph form just underneath that or in bullets. It's basically summary statements about more details of your brand. Remember, a brand is not a logo, it's not a cartoon character, it's not a tagline. A brand is a promise of value. So when we talk about our brand, we're talking about our promise of value to a potential client, a potential customer, a potential employer. Then, because industry is very interested in skills, what you are actually going to do and use to solve problems in my ecosystem, you're going to list out your skills. And I would subhead them, I would separate them out based on the technical and scientific skills, your business, your hard business skills, communication skills, of course, your computing skills, which includes your packages, languages, and platforms. And don't forget to list out your languages that you speak, read or write. Multilingual. If you're multilingual, that's absolutely very valuable, especially for a multinational company or organization. But honestly, everything is multinational now. So to be able to speak another language is something I want to make sure that you are promoting effectively. Then you would list out your education in reverse chronological order, of course, your research experience. And the way you list out your research experience on this hybrid resume CV is you give me a summary statement, which I call the macro problem. So for example, let's say the job that you had, in the research experience that you had, was working on your dissertation, your PhD. So the job itself was research assistant, Department of Materials Science and Engineering, the University of Arizona. That's my alma mater, so I have to throw that in. And so then you would list out right underneath that, you of course would give me the dates, and then you list out what the macro problem was that you were trying to solve. That's what the dissertation focused on, right? That's what you were trying to do over weeks, months, years, solve that macro problem. Then you're going to list out your accomplishments in bullet form. And each accomplishment that you've had over the weeks, the months, the days, the hours, are essentially micro problems that you solved. So you're going to clarify and communicate the accomplishments that you've had in terms of the micro problem that I was given, the solution that I came up with, the result of my solution, and even better, particularly for industry and government labs, if you can quantify that result, that helps me understand the context and significance of your problem-solving ability. I may not necessarily understand the details of the type of problem you were solving as a materials scientist, but I certainly can understand if you created a system that increased the efficiency of the system by 50%, or that it led to 2 first author papers, or it led to $20 million grant, or it led to 2 Nobel Prizes. So numbers tell the story, they tell the tale of what your accomplishment is. So be aware of that. It's very, very useful to communicate the quantification of your success at that achievement. Then you're going to list out your publications in that summary statement with a few highlights, like I mentioned, your presentations in a similar way, and then any honors and awards, grants, outreach and service, and then of course the leadership roles that you've had in the lab, in the research group, and out of that. That could include community leadership too. So those are the types of things that you could include on your hybrid resume and CV. And remember that your hybrid resume and CV, that is the main marketing document that you are utilizing to get an interview. And that's an important distinction to be aware of. The resume does not get you necessarily the job. About 99% of the time, it does not get you the job. It gets you an interview. And in the interview is when you and I are going to talk, and I'm going to learn why you would be of value to my organization. I'm going to learn how you would fit in well with the culture of my organization and profession and field. And I'm going to get evidence of your communications and team interaction skills. So that's where I'm going to make a decision, is during the interview. In the cover letter, though, you have to write an effective cover letter, and you need to think in terms of problem, solution, result. And now we add another piece, which I call the spin back. That's the customization. So many years ago, I had a client who was a PhD chemist, and he had applied for 60 jobs, and he had gotten 0 interviews. So I knew that his marketing materials, his resume, his cover letters, were not being effective, because clearly that is the data point. There's something wrong with his marketing materials. So I said, can you send me your cover letters so I can take a look at them? And he said, what cover letters? I have one cover letter, singular, that I use for every single job. And in fact, he did. He never customized it. He simply changed the words of the job position title and the company, but he never changed anything else in the cover letter. And I asked him, why don't you customize? You know that when you're writing a cover letter, it's all about the employer. You're trying to talk about yourself in the context of what you can do for the employer. So you have to talk about the employer. You have to talk about their facilities, their products, their services, their footprint, what they're doing, their mission, their values, the types of activities they're involved in. You have to talk about that. And his answer to me was, don't these employers know that I'm applying for so many jobs? I'm on the job market. I really need a job. I don't have time to customize every cover letter. And my answer to him was, no, they do know that, and they don't care. Because in a job search, if I am the decision maker, the job search process is not, again, about what you can get from me, but it's about what you can do for me. So talk to me in the cover letter, in the interview, in all your different materials. Talk to me in terms of problems you've solved in the past, but in the context of what problems you would solve for me in the future by talking about me. So that's the customization. That's where you get to say, I read on your website that you're looking to use AI and machine learning in more of your products. This is the kind of thing I did in my PhD. That's the spin back. So you talk about problems you've solved, solutions you've come up with, results of those solutions, and then you spin it back to them by customizing, by talking about their products, facilities, goals, even things that you read in the media, to create an alignment in their minds between what it is that you did in the past, what it is you're doing in the present, and what you will be able to do in the future for them. They need to know that what you've done in the past is directly relevant and related to what you will do in the future for them. That's where the customization and spin back comes. And I call it spin back because I actually physically move my body as I say this, because what you're doing is you've talked about yourself. This was the problem, solution, result I had. This was my accomplishment. And then you bring it back to them. But this will allow me to help you deploy AI solutions into your products. So you talk about the organization's missions and values, even their reputation, and you absolutely have to talk about yourself in the context of their needs. The length is about 1 to 2 pages maximum. Now, in addition to developing your marketing materials themselves, you also have to be thinking about networking. Now, networking can be done and should be done at any given time. No matter what is happening in the world, we want to always be networking. And the reason that we want to be doing that is because networking is not about what I can get from you. Networking is, in fact, the most honorable endeavor in which you can engage, because networking is about a spirit of generosity. It is about a spirit of, what can I do for you? What value can I provide for you? What problem can I help you solve, or can we solve together to move the agenda forward of your organization, of your team? That is the spirit of generosity. That is the essence of networking. So in the middle of any type of scenario that we're engaged in the middle of an economic crisis, in the middle of any type of scenario, we should always be networking and looking to serve as a resource to another party, to share our value and help them understand what it is that we could potentially do with them and for them to move their goals forward and to achieve their goals. Networking is a spectrum of activities. It starts with that first point of contact, and that could be me finding you on LinkedIn or me going through the MRS membership directory and finding somebody like yourself who works for this company and reaching out to you. It could be through LinkedIn, it could be through your colleagues and your peers and your advisors. It could be from serving on committees or subcommittees within MRS. It could be that you meet me at a conference. But to be very honest, the majority of my networking that I do is virtual. The majority of the networking that I do that leads to collaborations, that leads to jobs, that leads to career changing opportunities for both me and the other party is done through social media these days. It's through networking via email, finding somebody's name in the MRS membership directory, which is a fantastic benefit, by the way, the fact that you can access that directory, finding somebody's name and emailing them, or reading their paper and emailing them, or reading that they were quoted in an article and emailing them. And even through alumni networks, you can find people. So you do not have to be in person to network with somebody. You can do this from afar. But when you are in person, like in the future at the Meet Your Industry and Government Lab candidate poster session, that's also a wonderful way to connect with somebody, as is the MRS conferences, any of them. But the important factors in any type of scenario, in any type of job search, I just want to clarify for you, is we want to customize. Marketing ourselves, we need to connect the dots for them. And we need to use their language. So if they use the word customer, we use the word customer. If they use the word P&Ls, the term P&Ls, which means profits and losses in industry, we're going to talk in terms of profits and losses and P&Ls. Parrot their language so that they immediately see, that's a very important aspect of customization, they immediately see that you can jump in and join them and solve their problems immediately and help them solve their problems in new ways, in fact. So you're always thinking to discuss your value in terms of problem, solution, result, and spin back. This is just a reminder for you that my MRS requires you to opt in to receive career-related information from MRS. So log into my MRS so that you can opt in to receive all sorts of information, resources, articles, invitations to webinars, other career-changing, game-changing career opportunities that MRS is providing. They really want to be and are positioned to be your strategic career advisor and resource and partner throughout the lifetimes of your careers. I want to thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm sticking around for any conversation that we're going to have right now, but now I want to give it back to my colleague and friend, Zach Hood. Take it away, Zach.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alaina, for the excellent webinar. And on behalf of the Early Career Professional Subcommittee, we want to thank you for providing all these excellent tips for early careers within the MRS, as they're going to be super helpful as folks are looking for their dream industry or government jobs. Thank you so much, and I want to give you a virtual high five. At this point, we're going to be having a Q&A session, a question and answer session with our panelists. And at this point, I want to reintroduce the panelists. And whenever I introduce you, I want the panelists to answer a simple question. And that's, why did you choose a career in industry or at a government lab? So our first panelist is Eugene Bay. So I want to welcome you to the Q&A session. I want to thank you for being a panelist. I want to ask you, why did you choose a career at Palo Alto Research Center?
Hi, Zach and Alaina. Thanks very much for having me. So the question was, why did I choose a career in industry, right? Well, personally, I wanted to go out and create things, things that will be of immediate usefulness to customers, to the public, and an industry job allowed me to do that. But more than that, I wanted to go and solve problems and still do scientific research. So a place like Xerox Park actually let me, still be very close to research, be close to discovering new things, but yet have those be for applications that are immediately practical.
That's great. Yeah, I think finding applications that are practical and having a career that really can give back to the community is super gratifying. So thank you. Our next panelist, Christopher Capuano, is unfortunately, I think he had to step away for a moment. So if he's able to get back on, we'll introduce him as well. So he represents Enel Hydrogen. Our next panelist is Lucy Nolan, and she's from Intel. So I want to welcome you to this webinar, and I want to ask you, why did you choose a career at Intel?
Hi, Zach, and hi, Alaina, as well. I chose a career in industry for similar reasons as Eugene. I enjoyed my PhD, I enjoyed academic research, but the opportunity to solve immediate problems was very important to me. And I also really enjoy the rigor of working in industry. There's less capacity to fail, if you know what I mean. Like if you're developing, say, a new chip, and that chip is part of Intel's business plan, you have to make it work, and that rigor is something I really enjoy.
That's excellent. Yeah, I'm sure the rigor at Intel can be can be gratifying. It's also you're giving back to the customer at the end of the day. So I think that's a super important point that you bring up here. So thank you. So the next and the fourth panelist today is Stephen Spurgeon from Pacific Northwest National Lab. So Stephen, why did you choose a career at a national lab?
Hey, Zach and Alaina, thank you again for the chance to participate in the panel. So, I think for me, when I was in grad school, I had the opportunity to work in a number of different national labs. And I was just amazed by kind of the scale and the impact of the problems they were dealing with. And you just look across the national lab system in the United States, and they have tremendous resources, tremendous capabilities that are really unmatched in many parts of the world. And so for me, it was an opportunity to harness tools, capabilities, and work with scientists on really impactful problems that drew me to the national labs.
Yeah, that's definitely a very important point. That's also why I decided to explore a career at a national lab as well. I actually started as like an intern at Oak Ridge National Lab, and then eventually ended up at Argonne. And the resources, as you mentioned, at national labs are immense. And as a student, it's mind-boggling. And and then whenever you're working as a staff scientist, you really get to see the inner workings of the national lab firsthand. On a much more personal level, and it's definitely a great career choice. But of course, I'm a little bit biased. Great. So we're going to move on to the online submitted questions, and our first question is, how can I best market my academic training towards getting a job in industry or a government lab? So for this first question, we'll go around with our panelists, and we can start with Eugene here. So Eugene, how can somebody best market their academic package to a job, say, in industry?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. And I think thanks very much to Alaina for actually covering that earlier. I think one of the best things is using the right words and right phrases that people in the industry are most interested in, and what they're used to hearing. So, for example, if you've given if you've published something, right, that means you're good at communicating, you're good at writing things, you're good at explaining how something works. If you've and if you've given a presentation, then you have communications experience. So I feel like, well, depending on where you're working, I feel like you really should be presenting yourself that way. The other thing is also it's very unlikely that the subject of your PhD is directly relevant to your employer, what this future employer is looking for. So it's probably best to talk more about what skills you've learned, or what you're an expert at. And it's really important to remember, have the confidence that at the time when you have a PhD, that means you're the world's expert in that particular field that you wrote your thesis on. I think it's great to keep that in perspective all the time.
Yeah, that's definitely super important. I'd like to see also what Lucy has to say about. She also is from industry. Are there any points that you want to add to what Eugene mentioned?
No, I think he made a very good point, and actually Alaina had some good advice on this as well. I suspect that there are jobs out there where you do need a very close academic fit to the role that you're applying for, and others where you don't. I know Alaina gave several good examples of kind of non-obvious places where your materials background could be really useful. When you're applying for a job that is less of a direct background fit, I do think it's important, as Eugene said, to emphasize your skills as well as your knowledge. And do think about your skills broadly, as Alaina suggested. You want to know what you can do, and that may include running very complex experiments, developing new instrumentation, sophisticated data analysis, but it may also include mentoring students, being the safety monitor for your lab, writing grants. They are all also important skills, so don't forget to put them on.
Yeah, thank you so much for those tips for our audience. Also, I want to ask Stephen. So, like, how would you suggest how somebody could best market their academic package towards getting a job at a government lab?
Yeah, so I've been on a number of hiring panels recently, and I think one of the things that struck me is just doing your homework, trying to get a good sense of what the PI, the project manager, is looking for, and then, as the others said, really tailoring your presentation, tailoring your resume, what you highlight to that job listing, to the background research that you've done, because ultimately it's in a lot of ways, it's unfortunately a waste of time on the part of you, on the part of the project manager, if you come in and just talk in vague terms about what you're going to do. We all have tight deliverables. We have, in the case of government labs, we have funding agencies that have timelines and schedules and expectations, and we just want to make sure that those are met. And so it's in everyone's best interest if you have done as much homework as you can, and remain flexible at the same time. But I think ultimately, just showing the knowledge that you have that's relevant, the skills that are relevant, and really drawing those to the forefront, I think does everyone a service.
Yeah, those are excellent points. I think highlighting all of the skill sets that you have that are relevant to the actual job posting, and then also customizing your your CV and your cover letter to really highlight those skill sets is super important. Yeah, so thank you. So we're going to move on to the next question, which came from a member of our audience. And this member of the audience mentioned that they had a recent Master of Science degree in Material Science and Engineering, and they wanted to know if the panel could give any suggestions for them to be taken seriously for a research-based or engineering-based role, specifically in industry setting. So we could start this time with Lucy. Do you have any suggestions for this member of the audience?
I think that it's important in any recruiting situation to remember that the people who you're speaking to are the experts in the job that you're applying for. So they will be, if you are able to communicate what you're able to do, they should be able to sense that you have that expertise. So I would suggest that you are not shy and make sure that your resume or CV highlights not just what projects you were involved in, but what specifically your role was as part of it. a lot of projects are the work of many people, and it's easy to assume that if you're a master's student in a large group that consists of master's students, PhD students, and postdocs, that perhaps your role was minor. And I think we all know that that's not necessarily the case at all. So make sure that you make that clear and explicit. This was the project. This was my role.
Excuse
That's
me, Lucy,
excellent.
I think that's a great point. I just want to amplify that. I'm so glad you said that. I think one thing for people to remember is that a resume, a CV, because it's a marketing document, it's not you bragging. You're not boasting that I was a member of this team or that I did X. You are communicating truthful information about what your role was. And as Lucy said, you're trying to communicate your role and you're not overselling it. You are just selling the truth. And that's an important fact. I hear from a lot of particularly early career scientists and engineers who are afraid to put things on their resume because they think that it sounds like they're boasting. And I think it's very important for all of us to recognize that if you don't champion and communicate and clarify your value, nobody else is going to understand how that value would help them.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for amplifying that that point. Eugene, do you have any suggestions for this this audience member who has their recent Master of Science degree and how they could maybe be taken seriously, at a research-based or engineering-based role in industry?
Yeah, thanks, Zach. And I think Lucy had a great point about clarifying what your role is and just circling back to that, like often especially in the interview, for someone who's say got a master's but not a PhD, usually you'll find that employers who are looking to hire people with master's qualifications will be upfront about that. They're looking for someone with a master's, and one exercise I find quite helpful is and some places it might even be an interview question is, well, can you describe yourself or kind of like how you can contribute in just 3 words? And kind of decide for yourself what those 3 words are, and just you want to hammer that point in that maybe I'm dependable, or maybe I'm innovative, something like that. So I think that there are plenty of opportunities out there, and there's a role for everyone.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for exemplifying that point. So we're going to move on to the next question. And I think this one we have to pull Alaina in as well. And so this question is with regards to the hybrid resume and CV. And one of the audience members wanted us to elaborate about how long should the hybrid resume or CV be. And then after Alaina explains, we can get some feedback also from our panelists, because some of our panelists have mentioned that they've been on hiring committees. So Alaina.
Yes, thank you, Zach. And I'm laughing because I suspect that my answer is going to differ from every single panelist that we're all going to have. We may have generally the same idea, but I think it's going to be different. And that really goes to say that resumes and CVs and the hybrid document are very much an art. They're not a science. And everybody writes theirs differently, and everybody, and depending on what ecosystem you're in, expects a different type of document or a different length. So what I've heard in terms of length is you always want to make it as short as possible. And so I'd recommend it being no more than 2 pages. And many years ago, I was on a panel with somebody who was from industry, and she specifically said that the rule in her company is 1 page per 10 years of experience. So typically, if you were a new graduate with simply an undergraduate degree, you might only have 1 page worth of material. But I have always had my resume for all the different positions I've pursued has always been just a little bit longer, because I did have other information I wanted to share that, and here's the key, would be relevant to the hiring process and to the invitation to interview process. So I did tend to go a little bit longer. So I would say 1 to 2 pages, absolute max. I'm curious to hear what the other, what our colleagues think.
Yeah, so Eugene, what do you think in terms of like the length of a hybrid resume or CV?
Yeah, I've been on a number of interview panels, and some candidates, yeah, they submit their CV, the full CV, but that almost never gets looked at. So it's really the resume, and for that, usually we kind of lose interest after the second page. I feel that a lot of people like to say one page, but I feel like that isn't realistic these days, especially given just the ever increasing number of roles that people are taking. And there are also a lot of soft skills and computer skills, which are really good to know. Well, very good for the employers to know that you have, but all that adds up. And I think like 2 pages is about the most effective length for a resume. I'm curious to see as well if Lucy or Stephen, maybe they have a different experience looking at people's CVs, but usually we just pay attention to the resume, and 2 pages seems about the right length.
Yeah, Lucy, what do you think about the length?
Yeah, this is such an interesting question. I also find that 2 pages is about right. I realize I should probably give some background on my hiring experience as well. I'm the hiring coordinator for our area, so I run a team where we review resumes and do preliminary phone screening interviews, and based on that we bring people to our site for an on-site interview, and it's quite a large area. So as it happens, I review probably close to 400 or 500 resumes a year. So I've seen a lot. I agree that 1 page is usually too short for a PhD student. I also completely lose interest after 4 pages. Somewhere 2 to 3 pages is fine. Two usually is long enough to convey the information that we need to see.
Excellent, thank you. Stephen, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. For PNNL, our HR department, basically, if we've got a posting, will forward us, basically anything that kind of matches at all. So we'll get, maybe 100 CVs for a given position. And I think I'm kind of echoing what everyone else has said, which is like after the first page, I'm already falling asleep usually, and then by the second page, it's just kind of getting lost, and so like I'll move on to the next one. And really, I'm just very quickly scanning for someone that's a match, and then I'll kind of set them aside. And then maybe when I down selected from that initial whatever 80, then we'll kind of dig through the rest in detail. But I think that the key really is kind of, as Alaina said, at the very top of it, tell me what you're going to deliver to me, because again, I've got to meet those deliverables, I've got to meet those timelines, and I just don't have time to dig through all the nuances of your CV, which no doubt you put a lot of time into. But I think ultimately you have to make it easy for me to digest, compelling for me to then want to read more. But yeah, if it's not on the first page in general, it's probably going to fall by the wayside, unfortunately.
Yeah, those are all very important points that folks need to, keep in mind, that, the folks actually reviewing the resumes and the CVs, keeping it, concise to the point, and, and also, what you can deliver to the specific industry or government position is critical in order to, really shine in the initial screening of your application package. So we're going to move on to the 4th question. And a member of the audience asked, what are the common mistakes that applicants make during the hiring process, and how can one avoid these mistakes? So we could start, I think, this one with Lucy. So Lucy, like, while you mentioned that you've seen hundreds, of resumes and CVs, and I'm sure you've been involved in many different committees to hire, folks. So what are like some of the common mistakes that applicants, make, and how can they avoid these?
It's such a good question. I'm glad that someone asked this one. I think honestly, one of the biggest mistakes that I see is actually too much brevity, or more particularly, brevity in the wrong places. Now that we've just talked about how you need to keep your resumes to a reasonable length, say 2 pages, if you have more things to put on there than that, it is usually more effective to pick the important ones or to group them. Like instead of listing out 6 bullet points of kind of related skills that you have, make it 1 bullet point of a skill that you have, and here are some examples. Rather than take every item that you want to put in there and shorten it. So for instance, you put your publications, please include the title of your publication so that anyone reading the list can get a sense of what you've been publishing about. If you make the person screening hundreds of resumes go and look up all your papers to see what they are about, they are unlikely to do that, and it will likely hinder your chances of getting a job. So brevity in the right places, group things together where you can, focus on the important stuff. That's my advice.
That's excellent advice. Eugene, do you have anything to add, in terms of, because I'm sure you've seen many different resumes, CVs, and also, also interviewed folks for positions. Like, what are some common mistakes that you've seen for applicants for you to kind of, whenever you were doing the hiring process, and like, how would you suggest folks to avoid these common mistakes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in the interview process, first, is that the applicants, haven't actually done their homework as to the place they're interviewing for. All of this is, like what we do, how we make money, what our research interests are of, like, generally the team you're interviewing with, or even the company as a whole. Like, all of that is, well, a lot of that is public knowledge. And so I do see a lot of interviewees come in and, it's just the same whether they're at the Palo Research Center or at Company X. They're giving the same answers, and they really should be tailoring, their responses for the interview, let alone the resume, to each particular place they're applying at. And the other thing I also wanted to mention is, if you're a PhD student or a recent graduate, a lot of people actually don't make use of their school career center. And it's something that is a resource which is immensely helpful, and it's free, even if you're a recent graduate in most cases. And they really provide so many useful resources that a lot of people just don't make use of. So I see a lot of resumes that clearly look like they've only been proofread by other PhD students. And if you're applying for a job in the industry, well, maybe they aren't really the best people you should be getting to proofread your resume. So I think more people really ought to use the resources that are available to them.
Yeah, definitely. That's some great advice to folks. I think, utilizing, leveraging the resources that you have, and, and it's, yeah, definitely.
Oh, excuse me, Zach. May I interrupt? I just, excuse me, wanted to thank your colleague for saying that. It's very interesting to me about the resources. That's also where networking can really be helpful to you. So even if you've already been networking with people who work for the companies or the government agencies or the organizations that you want to work for, certainly if you and I already were networking, if you wanted to send your resume to me to review, I would be happy to do that, So utilize the resources of the networks that you have built, and recognize that networking today can deliver this type of dividend tomorrow.
Yeah, that's definitely an excellent point. I think, using your network to really, hone in on, like, how can you improve your resume, or how can you, really, polish off your interviewing skills, and, kind of have a mock-up interview within your network before going and, grabbing that position is super important. So I also want to ask Stephen, because you're at a government lab, what are some of the common mistakes that applicants make in terms of applying to a government position, and how can they avoid these mistakes?
So I think one of the biggest things, and I guess it applies to industry as well, is that people don't seem to be aware that the application process starts in many cases way before you actually submit a resume, right? And the most successful candidates, I think, for government positions, are ones that we have had exposure to in some form before they've actually applied for a job. And one of the ways that this can be done is, we have internship programs. We have many PIs at universities that are funded through the Department of Energy, get to come use our resources. And it's one of the best ways for me as a potential manager down the line to actually kind of test and get some sense of what your abilities are and how you work, is to either have worked with you in the past or to know someone at my laboratory who's interacted with you. And so I'd like to say that that's one of the keys is, if you can find some kind of prior connection, if you can have an opportunity to learn about the lab, learn about what they're working on, that really increases your chances of getting a job, exponentially, because you become a known quantity, right? In some sense, you're no longer a gamble for me if I can go to someone I trust and I say, okay, well, I've got this candidate, you look like you worked with them in the past. What do you think? That's the best assessment I can have of a potential candidate. And so I'd argue, obviously you're applying for a job now. Sometimes it's difficult to do that, but it's like Alaina has been saying, you need to keep this kind of long-term perspective on things. And people and places and laboratories that you might have interacted with years ago will come back in the future when you're looking for that job or that new opportunity. And so I would argue that's really key, is finding that connection, finding that fit, preferably in advance, and really using that to your advantage.
Yeah, and I'd like to echo on this point too, because I think, really pulling from your network or from, your experience is really key to, landing your dream job. Like I kind of started, my career as like an intern, at a national lab, and that has really helped me to really navigate the system, know what they're looking for in terms of applying and really answering the call, for whenever, a certain, position or fellowship really pops up, at a national lab. So I think that's an excellent point, Stephen, that you brought up here, really leveraging those connections that can help you propel yourself into, your dream job. So yeah, I really thank you for bringing that up. And this actually leads into our next question. So a member of our audience is actually asked, how important is networking to land a job in industry or at a government lab? And luckily, we have our networking guru here, Alaina, who's excellent at giving advice in terms of all aspects of networking. So I want to first start off with our panelists, and then if Alaina has extra points on networking to bring up, I'd like her to do so as well. So we can start here with Eugene. So like, in your opinion, how important is networking to land a job in industry?
Yeah, I simply cannot stress this strongly enough. Networking is absolutely crucial to getting a job. So for me, I personally also got my present job from actually going to the ARPA-E summit in Washington, D.C. And that's where I met people at the company I now work for. And so, when a lot of like job application processes are just, okay, yeah, just submit your CV here and then, we'll let you know. That's actually a very inefficient way of getting your CV actually looked at or taken seriously. You want to know someone who can get your resume to the top of the pile to get it being seriously looked at. If you know someone you've worked with, for example, they can vouch for you too. They can say they can act as a reference, right? They can say, yes, I've worked with so and so, and he or she was fantastic. That kind of thing is really invaluable. The other thing is also, like, even if you don't actually know anyone or haven't worked with someone in this company before, I think it's a great way to demonstrate your interest, right? That you've been able to go search them out, ask intelligent questions, and then they'll remember you. And now there was something else. Oh yes, that's right. So even if I also suggest that like, even if you're not looking for a job right now, it's also very valuable to go and just make contacts, because one of the things that you can do, and lots of people don't do this, is actually you can call up some of these people you've met at maybe a conference, a poster session, for example, and ask them, hey, I'm kind of interested in like what it's like to work at your place. Can I do an informational interview with you? Sometimes when you come straight up and you're asking, hey, can you get me a position, that it doesn't go down so well. But if you start out and say, hey, I want to learn more, can I just have a 30-minute chat with you to learn about something? I think that actually goes a really long way. So, networking isn't just like making a lot of superficial connections, but really also getting to know, if you're a good fit for them as well. So I cannot stress any more strongly that networking is really, really important.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think, meeting folks at conferences or at different types of events and really following up on them and showing your interest, in their company goes a long way, whether you're interested in a job there or just interested in, just seeing what the company is all about. Like we go to some of these conferences and meet hundreds of people, and, maybe not super deeply, but, they're able to follow up with a handful of them just to learn. It can go a long way. In terms of not only growing your network, but you never know if like an opportunity presents itself to go a different direction in your career. So I think those are some excellent points that you bring up.
Yeah, I also want to add that a lot of conferences like the MRS or the Gordon conferences, actually a lot of presenters are from the industry too. So it's a great opportunity to actually go to them and talk to them in person. And then when they see your resume, they can actually match a face to the name. Oh yeah, he was the person who was really interested in asking some really great questions about work.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, we're hoping too with the new Meet Your Industry and Government Candidate Poster Session, it kind of can help, network the MRS candidates, with industry and government attendees at, upcoming MRS conferences. So so we're hoping that that can help a lot of the early careers within this community. I want to also ask Stephen, so like how important, in your opinion, is networking in terms of landing a job at a government lab?
Yeah, so I mean, I have a similar story to Eugene where, I had a connection. It was kind of a complicated story, but it was someone who had interviewed for a postdoc position in my group in grad school. And I stayed in touch with him for, I think it was like 4 or 5 years, because I thought his work was really cool and he was doing a complementary technique to what I'd been studying. And when it came time then to start applying for jobs, I started emailing everyone I knew. And he told me, well, there's a guy who's leaving our lab and, he has a very particular set of skills, I guess like Liam Neeson. But he had a very particular set of skills that they were trying to fit. And it just happened to overlap with my research, right? And so then I went and applied and I had his kind of endorsement, okay, he knew me for a long time. And it didn't get me the job, but it got me an opportunity, right? And I think that's really the value of networking, right? Is that it's not going to replace doing hard work. It's not going to replace, really having scientific excellence, but it's going to give you an opportunity that you might not otherwise have. And I've seen time and time again where people from years ago, people who I thought had disappeared off the face of the earth, come back, and they're emailing me, asking me things. I run into them at a conference. They happen to be on a proposal review committee or a hiring committee or whatever it might be, right? And so I think Alaina has talked about this, but it's just important to maintain, again, that long-term vision for things. And for me, it wasn't that I was, 4 years or whatever before my PhD, immediately thinking, okay, this guy's going to give me a job in the future or help me get a job. It's more, I thought his work was cool. I stayed in touch with him. And down the line, it led to a connection that I had never anticipated would have happened. But I think I've seen that play out in my own career, and I've seen that play out many times at the laboratory. And so I would just say, be open to those opportunities.
I think that, Steve, I think that really just sums up what networking is in such an amazing way. And the same thing with the other panelists. Unfortunately, I think we are out of time for any more questions, and I apologize to the audience members, but I just want to thank the panelists and my colleague Zach on this amazing adventure that we had, and for all the work that they do in terms of helping early career professionals and, quite frankly, the greater community of Materials Research Society members and also materials scientists and engineers around the world. This has been my pleasure and my honor to be here with you today. You are welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Alaina G. Levine. Of course, go to my MRS for more information. And any of our panelists will be happy to be networked with you, to receive emails from you to talk about the work that they do on behalf of MRS and the greater community. Thank you, Zach, so much.
Yeah, and I would like to also thank all of our panelists for providing some excellent tips for the members of the MRS and all the early careers that are out there who are looking for a job in industry or at a government lab. And I really appreciate your participation in this exciting webinar. And thank you all for your time and providing excellent feedback for the community.
Thank you. This concludes the formal part of the webinar, and as you know, this is recorded and you'll be able to access it on the MRS website. Thank you, everyone. I wish you all the best.